Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Thursday, August the 31st, 2023. So it's been 26 years, hasn't it? She has been dead for over a quarter of a century. I remember seeing the news that Princess Diana had died in a car crash. I think when the news came out, maybe we didn't yet know that she was dead, that she'd been in a car crash. Yeah, it was sort of, I don't know, middle of the night, August 31st. And, you know, it was just weird. I mean, it was just fascinating. You know, it was fascinating seeing how sort of crestfallen the television presenters were. You know, people die all the time. I had no connection to Princess Diana. But I suppose in Britain at the time, there was massive polarisation. You know, some people were really completely upset about it. She was the Queen of Hearts, and she'd gone, almost like a family tragedy. And then there were other people, perhaps like me, who didn't really care. I mean, I cared, but did I care? I mean, you know, just one cares as much as if any member of the public has died. It's, you know, it was just, yeah. I mean, I think that was my attitude at the time. I think a lot of people had that attitude. So there was a split in the country. Apparently, one group of people who was, you know, really badly affected by this was, you know, people who themselves had a loss at the time of Diana's death. You know, people who had a member of family die. You know, end of August, beginning of September. You know, no one took it seriously. I mean, you know, they said, "Oh yeah, great," but you know, it's Diana that matters. I suppose that's kind of like, you know, like when C.S. Lewis, who did the Narnia Chronicles, and when Aldous Huxley, when those two died, probably people didn't notice that these two very important authors had died, because they had the misfortune to die at the same time as, pretty much close to the same day as John F. Kennedy. In Russia, in the Soviet Union, there was a very famous composer. I can't remember his name. I should know his name. He died on the same day as Stalin, and so, you know, they couldn't find any flowers for him, because every flower in the Soviet Union was needed for Stalin's funeral. So yeah, that would have been the problem if you happened to have had the misfortune to die at the same time as Princess Diana. Okay, you might have got flowers for your funeral, but you might not have attracted the sympathy you might normally have expected, or at least your family wouldn't have attracted the sympathy. So I'm going to look at Princess Diana's chart today. I'm going to look at the chart for when she had her crash, chart for when she died. She didn't die in the crash. I think the crash was at 0:23 a.m. And she died at 3 a.m. So she died over 2.5 hours after the accident, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. I also want to look at the chart of England and see how Diana's death related to the English psyche at the time. You know, as always with these things, you know, I'm doing this because you know, I just want to show you how sort of one might look at charts astrologically, you know, particularly in terms of death. You know, what is the astrology of death? What works? What doesn't work? And I'm not saying this is a way of predicting death in the future, because we are looking at this in terms of complete 2020 hindsight. Nonetheless, I think there are a couple of techniques which show some very powerful signatures, and that might be useful in terms of future practice, not just about trying to predict people's deaths, trying to predict other stuff. But before I do that, I want to look at the astrology for today, which is Thursday, August the 31st, 2023. So let's look at today's chart. So this is the positions of the planets at noon, set for New York. We can see that the moon is still in Pisces. It's moved away from the opposition of Saturn, and it's still very much a feeling of the full moon. The full moon, if you were in the Americas, you kind of would have had the full moon yesterday, but in other parts of the world it'd be today. And so, when you've got a full moon, it can sometimes be about seeing the truth. Because the full moon shines light on everything. So if we perhaps been kidding ourselves about something, or we just hadn't known the facts, the full moon can come along and show us what's true, show us what's false. So that's something to look out for today. I mean, not just today, tomorrow, next few days. If there's something you don't understand, maybe there are people you don't understand, you can now get a real insight into what makes them tick. Or if you're involved in some confusing matter and you just don't know what's going on, the full moon gives you an opportunity to really see what's happening. So I would strongly recommend that you take advantage of the full moon. I would also say that I suspect that today is going to be better than yesterday, because yesterday there was this conjunction between the moon and Saturn, which was kind of a bit difficult. It might have been difficult to express ourselves, and now things are certainly a lot easier. Though we mustn't say the first thing that comes into our head. I mean, look, the moon is in Pisces, Mercury is in Virgo, so if you've got Moon and Mercury in opposition to each other, the two communication planets, Moon, the planet of emotional communication, Mercury, the planet of sort of mental communication, you bring them together. And in an opposition, we might say things that we don't mean, or we might say things that get misinterpreted with that Moon opposition, Mercury. So we do have to be very careful what we say. And if in doubt, we should probably just keep quiet. On a more positive note, the moon is making a sextile aspect to Jupiter. You can see that the moon is in Pisces, and Jupiter's in Taurus. So the moon is in the sign of Jupiter's rulership. Jupiter is in the sign, Taurus, of the moon's exaltation. So there's a mixed reception between moon and Jupiter. And I think this is pretty fortunate. It may be a good time for starting a new project, agreeing to something. The full moon is behind us, the conjunction to Saturn is behind us. We can now start to think straight and sort of make commitments. And there's a bit of optimism now creeping into the proceedings as that, as the Moon-Saturn opposite conjunction, that the influence of that starts to wane. We start picking up on the Moon-Jupiter sextile, so we can really, get ourselves and other people going. Get everyone to, think, focus on the bright side of life. Yeah, we can do that. So do make an effort in that direction. There's a rather interesting aspect today as well between Jupiter and Saturn. Jupiter and Saturn are exactly 72 degrees apart. Now, 72 degrees is 1/5 of the circle. So if you've got a cake, you cut it into 5 equal slices. Then, that each slice is going to be 72 degrees. It's going to be 72 degrees. So Jupiter is quintile Saturn. Now, a quintile is regarded as a man-made aspect. I mean, all aspects, I suppose, to some extent are man-made, but it's often said that it's a man-made aspect. It's about what we deliberately try to create, and it can be connected with style. So, if we've got a Jupiter-Saturn, with this Jupiter-Saturn quintile, we're going to be trying to bring together these two concepts of, Jupiter, which is about expansion, Saturn is about restriction, and so we're going to have a style of trying to sort of bring them together. How can we be focused and disciplined and also be expansive? So it's like we might be very optimistic about the future, but we've got to be very detailed about it. We've got to be very focused on it. We've got to kind of discipline our optimism, and we've got to make a conscious effort to do that. Maybe it's difficult, but I think some of us can pull it off. And the Jupiter and Saturn as a pair are often connected with the economy, business cycles. Jupiter is about economic growth, for example. Saturn is about restriction, recession, and bringing those two things together. Listen to what economists are saying on the news. Listen, I don't know if anyone is connected with the Federal Reserve, and you listen to what they're saying. They're going to be trying desperately to create a certain message, I think, without contradicting themselves, which is going to be kind of a bit difficult. We need growth, but we've got to growth. That's Jupiter. But we've got to focus on controlling inflation, and that's a Saturn thing to do. So maybe that's how the Jupiter-Saturn quintile is going to work. Might also find that a lot of people are talking about economics. I've just been talking about economics. But do they know what I'm talking about? Me and economics, that doesn't really work. I remember my first year economics exam, I nearly failed. I got an E. An E was, believe it or not, a pass. But anyway, economics isn't really my thing. So you're going to have people like me who are sort of talking about economics, claiming to know what they're talking about, but really haven't got a clue. So that might be how the Jupiter-Saturn quintile works. People claiming to have knowledge about business cycles, the economy, but really, if you scratch the surface, you might find quite a lot of ignorance. But it's all style. Style's important. Style's more important than substance, isn't it? I don't know. So those are a few things going on today. I think, as far as relationships are concerned, I mentioned this a few days ago. Uranus continues to be conjunct the Venus-Saturn midpoint. I've mentioned this before, but here's Saturn, here's Venus. Uranus is on the Venus-Saturn midpoint. So in relationships, just watch out for complicated, twisted feelings. If people don't get what they want emotionally, whatever, unrequited love, unrequited desire, people feeling they're being ignored in relationships, particularly in a relationship that isn't working well, that Uranus on a Venus-Saturn midpoint could cause some people to just behave in a really unpleasant way. So I mean, I've made this warning before. But if you're in a relationship and it's not working well, and things are getting emotionally complicated, I would focus perhaps on other areas of your life. So let's now turn to my forecasts for the 12 signs. So here we go. These are my forecasts for Thursday, August the 31st, 2023. Aries. It's easy to get emotional, but is it worth the effort? You could waste a lot of time getting excited and upset about things that you can't change. On the other hand, the way forward might be to keep focusing on the details and to save the joy and the anger until the job is done. Out of the darkness comes a financial opportunity. Taurus. Your social life is looking good, even though some people aren't to your taste. You can set the pace, and your suggestions are likely to receive an enthusiastic reception. In fact, you might be able to win over certain individuals who in the past had been a problem. In general, pleasure is a balancing act. Gemini. If you're working, then the situation is improving. Some of the restrictions from the recent past are starting to resolve themselves. At the same time, you are becoming luckier. It's difficult to know where the luck is coming from. Maybe it's from the depths of your unconscious. But your family must not be ignored. Cancer. Don't underestimate yourself and don't allow problems to cloud your judgment. Your position is improving, and in many respects your luck has changed for the better. And perhaps you just need some additional advice. But if you do need a bit of help, it's no good unless you actually ask for it. On the other hand, as one person's influence grows, another person's influence diminishes. Leo. You have a better understanding of certain financial and material details, and as a result, you're moving into a position where you can make clear decisions. After all, the truth of the matter is close at hand. Relationships can prosper. They can even get more intense, provided you listen carefully to your feelings. Virgo. Your eyes have been opened and you can now get a much clearer view of your relations with other people, whether they be friends, partners, lovers, or family members. And maybe you'll get a feel for their impact on you. You might then want to reconfigure your social life so that your own vital interests are being properly looked after. Libra. You watch people go about their daily business and you wonder why they are doing what they are doing, and it occurs to you that mistakes are being made. But you are concerned perhaps that maybe now is not the right time to point out these mistakes. Well, I don't know. You have to get it right. I suppose don't point out to someone they're doing something wrong unless it's really necessary. But on the plus side, at the moment you are quite skilled at imparting information without causing offence. Scorpio. Keep busy and don't be afraid of social contacts, because with the moon making a sextile aspect to Jupiter, you come over as being an attractive and charismatic figure, with a unique sparkle, and there is no need to give anything away. The more other people have to guess, the more attractive you become. Sagittarius, you want to give the impression of being tough, the kind of person that's in full control of everything. It's probably not the real you, and we're talking about a stylistic approach. Those that don't know you may be impressed, but you can't hide your real self from those who are close to you. When you're at home, you feel comfortable and perhaps fortunate. Capricorn, Jupiter is making a 72-degree aspect to Saturn, your ruling planet. You want to show the world a softer, more expansive view of yourself, and you want to demonstrate that you have a powerful imagination. This may also be reflected in the way you dress, for example, being less austere and more colourful. Aquarius, some things are natural. Other things are deliberately created by human beings. And sometimes it's okay to create an artificial situation provided you know its limits. Something that is unsustainable in the long term but in the shorter term could be useful. Just don't kid yourself into believing something that's not true. Pisces, you're more relaxed than you were yesterday, and other people really feel it. They can express themselves more easily, and they are less self-conscious in your presence. And with the moon aspecting Jupiter, your ruling planet, you can get your message across loud and clear. A short journey might be beneficial. So I'm now going to transition to the I Ching. As always, I threw 3 coins and I asked the question, what is Thursday going to be like for visitors to my YouTube channel? So the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 21, biting through. This hexagram is a bit tough. I mean, literally biting through something. It's about penalties. It's about dealing with people who are not behaving as they should. There are people like that apparently around us. They're not behaving in a particularly mature or responsible way, and they may be holding us up. And so you have to ask, what do you do? So, this might be, I don't know, a member of your family being maybe obnoxious, or someone at work who's just holding everything up. One of your friends behaving badly, something like that. Well, what do you do about it? I mean, when we talk about penalties, I mean, this is not this is not the Chinese government we're talking about, under some tyrannical emperor. No, it's just about how we manage our day-to-day life. Penalties are things that we can do. I mean, one penalty I suppose we can always impose on someone is to say we don't want anything more to do with them. I mean, that's as far as it goes, isn't it? And that, in a social sense, is quite an extreme penalty. But the I Ching, there is a moving line here. This first line moves, and it kind of suggests that there are people who they possibly didn't know better. They've done stuff that they shouldn't have done, but it's not a big deal at the moment. So it may be a situation where we don't have to blow them out of the water. We can just, maybe remind them of what their responsibilities are. It talks about small penalties, not large penalties. Just, giving someone, a quiet word and saying, no, it needs to be not done like this, it needs to be done like that, and so forth. So that is not bad. And this hexagram 21, it does move. it moves to hexagram number 35, which is progress. So having sorted out that problem, having bitten through, we can start making good progress, with whatever we need to make progress with. So perhaps, I don't know, if it's at work, there might be someone causing trouble at the beginning of the day, sort the problem out, avoid any arguments, everyone's happy, then we can make progress. Likewise in the family and social life, so on. So overall, looks good. So anyway, let's now talk about Princess Diana. I have, of course, talked about her before, but maybe I want to take a slightly different angle. So I suppose the question is, one question is, would it have been possible to predict her death? It's a morbid thought, but it is a question. Supposedly she was seeing astrologers. I don't know how many astrologers there were. I don't know what these astrologers told her. Obviously, we wouldn't know, because that would be client confidentiality. But it'd be interesting to know in her last meeting with an astrologer what she was told, and would she have been given any warnings? Looking at these charts, I think there's enough to say yes, someone should have warned her. I think there was scope for telling her to be careful. But then would she have known? Would she have been able to foresee that she'd get into a car driven by a drunk who drove over the speed limit, and he was drunk, and through this tunnel, and did he hit the side of a tunnel or whatever, and killed himself, and of course killed Diana. So let's just start by looking at her horoscope with this in mind. Is there anything to say in this chart that there's potentially a violent death? I suppose it's a violent death if you die in that kind of accident. Is death an issue in this horoscope? Now, house system is an issue here. So if you are using the Placidus house system, you would take the view that she has Sun-Venus conjunction in Cancer. Then you look at all of these 4 planets up here, and you say, well, that's in the 8th house. In astrology, the 8th house is connected with death. On the other hand, if you're using the whole sign house system, which it's become really popular, the whole sign house system. I kind of try to use both, but so in the whole sign house system, this is her 7th house, Gemini, because she's got Sagittarius rising, so she has nothing in the 7th house. From a whole sign approach, that Sun-Mercury conjunction, wide Sun-Mercury conjunction, would be treated as being in the 8th house, and this Uranus North Node conjunction would be treated as being in the 9th house, and this Mars-Pluto is in the 10th house. I kind of feel that maybe the Placidus house system works a bit better here in terms of looking at her death. She has got Uranus in the 8th house, conjunct the North Node, so that might reflect death, perhaps. But what I find kind of more interesting about her chart is the fact that she has got her Aries point on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So let me explain what that means. Her Mars-Saturn midpoint, here is her Mars, here is her Saturn. So the midpoint is at around 1444 Scorpio. There it is. There is her. Where's it gone? There it is. 1440. That's Mars Saturn. 1444 Scorpio. So that means it is very close to a sesquiquadrate, 135-degree aspect to 0 degrees Aries, and using the sort of German approach, Witter's approach, you would say Alfred Witter, the German astrologer who was very big in the first half of the 19th century, first half of the 20th century. And his influence persists, certainly in Germany. If you've got Aries on a Mars-Saturn midpoint, that can indicate a public death, because Aries is the world at large, and then Mars-Saturn is the death pair, and so she has something in her chart relating to having a public death. It's always there. It was there since the time she was born, and it was only potential. Now, I think you'd agree that her death was pretty public. I mean, dying in that tunnel, journalists were on the scene pretty much straight away. Of course, it said she died because she was being chased by journalists, but of course she died because the driver was drunk. So that is the potential, and so we would need to look at that potential. Now, before I look at the potential, I just want to quickly consider Diana's chart and consider her relationship to England. I say England rather than the United Kingdom because the England horoscope is set. England has a number of different horoscopes. A lot of the horoscopes are to do with reorganisation. When two parliaments get merged. There's a horoscope from the early 20s when Southern Ireland, Republic of Ireland, got its independence. So the moment that happened, the British Isles had to completely reconfigure, and so you could say there's a new chart for Britain relating to when North and South Ireland split. So yes, I mean that you could say that. But in terms of the original chart, the prime chart, that is treated as being the coronation of William the Conqueror on Christmas Day 1066. I mean that is important because there's been, by and large, continuous government. There's been a constant. There's been real continuity in England since Christmas Day 1066. Yes, there's been a civil war. There's been the Wars of the Roses, but you can see that the succession of one king to another is pretty straight since then. And England has never been occupied by foreign invaders since 1066. Of course, William the Conqueror invaded England successfully, and after that we've had a great deal of continuity. So that chart, the December 25th 1066 chart, I think is important. So here it is. It says December the 31st 1066. Don't worry about that. It is December the 25th. That's just the way the program calculates it. And one wonders, how Diana actually related to England. I mean, some would say that England destroyed her. Harry, with his negativity towards England, he seems to be blaming perhaps blaming this country. I mean, he doesn't want to live here. So what was the relationship between Diana and England? I think she herself may have wanted to leave the country. If we take okay, so in inner wheel we've got England, outer wheel we've got Diana. So there is the UK chart. It's England is a Capricorn, and okay, if you live in Scotland, you might be saying, well, you're not, that's got nothing to do with it. But it's England, I suppose, is a country that was able to, it conquered Wales. It sort of had a more complex relationship with Scotland, but London became the capital of the island. So I think it is valid to use this chart. So Diana was a Cancerian. She had her sun at 9:40 Cancer, a sensitive Cancerian. Clearly she was a woman who, to a great extent, lived through her feelings. And that sun is opposition England's sun. England's sun is at 9:55 Capricorn. Now that kind of fits, doesn't it? Capricorn, serious, the tradition, this is the way we do things, and her sun is just opposition that. And I think when she sort of married Charles and went into the centre of the establishment, I think she probably felt that 1066 chart really. I think she might really sort of weigh in on her. So that's my main point about the 1066 chart. One interesting thing about the 1066 chart, though, is the moon, and I'll be talking about the moon a bit later. But the moon in that Christmas Day 1066 chart is at 29 Pisces. The moon in astrology, when you're dealing with a chart of a country, is often the people. And the people, I mean, I don't really see the British people as being sort of Pisces in the 12th house. But maybe they are. Maybe the British people are more emotional than we think about. We talk about the British stiff upper lip and all of that. But maybe Britain represents, the fickleness perhaps of the public. I don't know. And it's widely conjunct the South Node. So if the South Node is the line of least resistance, where we should be moving away from, it seems that the sort of Pisces concept is something we should be moving away from as a nation. I suppose the British, the English, they're quite big drinkers. They're quite big drug takers. So at least now they are. So maybe that's the moon in Pisces. The ordinary people getting drunk, taking drugs, and of course actually getting caught up in their own feelings, or at least some of them. And I know that that certainly doesn't seem to fit the sort of standard stereotype of that about the British. But that moon is conjunct with South Node, so that sort of chaotic image of the British people is something we should be moving away from. We should be moving towards the North Node, which is Virgo. That's very sensible, focusing on details, and maybe that's what England is like, or should be like, when it's at its best. When is Britain at its best? I mean, like the Battle of Britain, for example. I think the guy who organised the Battle of Britain's defence against the Germans, I think he was a Virgo. Dowding, I believe he was a Virgo, and Britain's defence in the Battle of Britain was not. It was not about heroics. It was all about careful organisation and every communications being properly organised. The country divided up into strips, and it was done. Yeah, it was done in a very organised Virgoan kind of way, and that's perhaps how Britain should functions best when it's like that. But I don't know. And I'm going to talk about that very soon, and how it relates to the death of Diana. So, as far as the death of Diana is concerned, so the death of Diana. Well, we'll take her accident. This 1223. So this is a chart for the accident. There are some important things about this chart. Now, remember that I said that Diana had her Mars-Saturn midpoint at 1444 Scorpio, 1444 Scorpio. Now, at the time of the accident, the moon was at 1506 Leo. So the moon was exactly square her Mars-Saturn midpoint. So she had the moon hitting her Mars-Saturn midpoint. Moon, female planet, death of a woman. So the moon may have represented roughly the time of day when it was going to happen. But then the midheaven, remember, the midheaven moves 1 degree every 4 minutes. The midheaven, assuming this 1223 is correct, when she had that accident in Paris, this is set for Paris, the midheaven was at 1446 Aquarius. So the midheaven, that was the minute, that was the precise moment it happened. And so the midheaven was square her Venus-Mars midpoint, her Mars-Saturn midpoint, when she had the accident. So that kind of works really well. And we can see this. We can see this in her solar arc directions. Additionally, so I'm coming back to the accident chart. If we look at her solar arc directions for her solar arc directions for when she for the accident. So her solar arc sun. So remember, we're moving everything. Every planet is moved 1 degree every year. So she was 36 when she died, when she was killed. So her progressed solar arc directed sun was at 1412 Leo, which was coming up to her Mars-Saturn midpoint. And again, the moon was at 15 Leo when she, in the sky, not the directed moon, but the moon in the sky, when she had her accident, that's where it was. It was on her Mars-Saturn midpoint. And the moon was at 2934 Pisces. So the moon was 135 degrees from her Mars-Saturn midpoint. So the solar arc direction had moved, this configuration she had, because she has a sun-moon 135 degrees apart. The solar arc direction had moved this onto her Mars-Saturn midpoint. And so by solar arc direction, we could see there was a problem. And then hitting her Mars-Saturn midpoint. And then at the actual accident, the moon triggered it. And then we said Jupiter was also at 14. Jupiter was at 1422 Aquarius. So Jupiter was square her Mars-Saturn midpoint. So, when I was talking about Yevgeny Prigozhin, who had in his natal chart Jupiter on his Mars-Saturn midpoint, he died in that plane crash. So for him, there was a kind of feeling that maybe he was always going to have an easy death. Jupiter on the Mars, so transiting Jupiter was on Diana's Mars-Saturn midpoint. Remember Jupiter, is it really a fortunate planet? Not always. It was transiting, and I suppose she didn't really have an easy death. She had the accident at 12:23, and she was still conscious, probably in great pain, and she took she wasn't dead for over 2.5 hours afterwards. So not an easy death, but in this case, I suppose Jupiter is just the planet that is releasing it, is making it happen. That's not a good thing. But so just a reminder that Jupiter is not always a fortunate influence. So Jupiter was exactly on the midheaven when she had the accident. At the time of the accident, Jupiter was on the midheaven. Supposedly a fortunate event, Jupiter on the midheaven, but in her case, Jupiter on the midheaven represented the accident, and it represented the thing that killed her. And Jupiter on the midheaven lined up with the Moon, and it was hitting her her Venus-Mars midpoint. Her Mars-Saturn midpoint. Now, one other thing, there are several other things I wanted to look at. I wanted to actually compare the chart of Diana's death. This is her death chart. It's a couple. Slightly. This is things have moved on after 3 o'clock. I think you'll. So the accident chart is certainly more dramatic than her death chart. The accident was the big thing. She wasn't going to survive after the accident, so I think the death chart is not quite as dramatic. So if we compare her death chart with England, remembering all these people mourning her death, or some people mourning her death, other people not being quite so caught up in it. So if we compare England with the death chart, is there anything interesting? Now, the UK okay, so I've got this. I think I've got this the wrong way around. Hold on, let me just do it again. Okay, so we're going to have England in the middle. We're going to have Diana's death on the outside. Okay, that's better. So, assuming it's correct, and William the Conqueror really was crowned at mid-noon on Christmas Day, that means that England has 22 degrees 18 minutes Aries rising. Now, it might be a few degrees either way. Did they really know what? I don't know what timekeeping was like in Norman England, but you can see that Saturn, transiting Saturn, was right on England's midheaven. England's ascendant. I think that's pretty amazing. Really, Saturn is this rather grim planet on the country's ascendant. It's the whole way the country sees the world. It's a shock for the country, and yes, it's about death. So I would have said that's important, and I think the fact that Saturn's on the ascendant, that shows us, we should be really looking at the 1066 chart. It's important, this chart. Now that's one thing going on. Another thing going on was that there was a north node. The nodal axes were returning. So England has has its north node at 1925 Virgo, and at the time of her death, the north node was at 1944 Virgo. So the node was returning to where it was at birth. And so I'm kind of thinking that might be like what I was saying. England has this north node in Virgo. That's the way it should be. That's the way it should be going forward. The north node is the way we should be going. The south node is kind of the line of least resistance. So, north node, Virgo. We should really be quite matter of fact about her death. Some of us were. Of course, the Queen got a lot of flack for being somewhat detached. And there were sort of arguments about them, refusing to fly some flag at half-mast over Buckingham Palace because protocol and tradition would not allow it. That's perhaps the Virgo. But the other side of it, you've got this massive emotional outpouring, the South Node in Pisces, conjunct the Moon in Pisces. Okay, they're 10 degrees apart, but it was the same sign. So I would have said that the Pisces was that outpouring, and I would have said, I don't know, I just don't think, I didn't think that was really suitable. I didn't think that was the way the country should have behaved. But of course, I'm a Gemini. I'm not. I just find it difficult to get caught up in that kind of stuff, that sort of public mourning. Yeah, and a lot of people didn't. But I think that's perhaps how we can see that North Node in Virgo, South Node in Pisces. Maybe that's the split I was talking about at the beginning of this video. Some people really weren't affected by it. They weren't mourning Diana. They just found it interesting, maybe, or just found it tasteless that people were emoting about her. Then, of course, you had another group of people who were very upset and wanted to mourn. I think that nodal axis in England's chart really does reflect this. Finally, I want to look at the lunation prior to her death. So this is this is commonly done in astrology. New moons and full moons are used to try to make predictions. They give an indication about what's going to happen perhaps over the next 2 to 4 weeks afterwards. Some would say that they give indications about much longer periods, maybe years. So there are different views on this. So this is the lunation before Diana died, set for France. So you got August 18th, 1997. There was a full moon, and you can see that set for France, Mars is exactly rising, right on the ascendant. Now, this death of Diana didn't really affect the French people. Didn't actually really affect the British people in a logical sense. But nonetheless, it was suggesting that perhaps a violent event was going to happen in Paris, and there are many ways that chart could have manifested. It could have been a bomb. Certainly have been quite a lot of bombs in Paris over the last few decades. I remember a lot of big bombing. There was a lot of bombing in the 1980s, I remember. Wasn't that right? I think something to do with Algeria. So Mars is a signature on that, and I think if you've been looking at that lunation, you would have said, "Hold on, something could, watch out. There could be a problem there." So how does this lunation actually relate to the death chart? So let me just show you the two charts. So we're going to put and Diana's death on the outside. So when Diana died, Mars was at 1032 Scorpio. At the time of this full moon, Mars was at 232 Scorpio. So, in other words, and then if you look, you can see that the midheaven for the full moon, so the midheaven of the new moon midheaven was at 1035 Leo, and the IC was at 1035 Aquarius. So Mars moved on after the date of the full moon on August the 18th, and then on October the 31st, in the first few hours of the day, Mars moved on to being exactly square the midheaven and the IC of that full moon, and that's when she had the accident. So Mars, in this particular case, that full moon actually provided the timing of the event. You just had to, you saw Mars relatively close to the midheaven, and you just had to wait for the body of Mars to move to being actually square of midheaven, and that's when Diana's accident. That's when Diana's accident happened, and you can see that this midheaven was also on the Jupiter-Uranus on the Jupiter-Uranus midpoint. You know, normally Jupiter-Uranus is, thank the Lord, it's supposed to be a relief. In this case, it's about an accident. Maybe for Diana it was a relief, I don't know. So anyway, that's all I'm going to say about the subject of Diana and her death. And I think it's kind of quite interesting to sort of relate it to England's chart. Yeah, I hope you found it interesting. And yeah, if you want to know about England, I spent a lot of the time, in these videos talking about America's chart for 1776, and I think we should be, we want to understand the UK. I would kind of recommend going to the 1066 chart. There's some interesting stuff in there. Anyway, thank you for listening, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.